Hello, welcome to My Personal Opinion. My name is JM, and well, these are my opinions. Today I want to talk about OCD. My channel will probably have a lot of influence from my perspective based on the fact that I do have OCD. There's a lot of things I'd like to do. I'd like to do product reviews. I'd like to do some conversations on many multiple topics, technical topics, especially things like AI. I've been in the IT business for a long time. So, and a lot of those perspectives I do think are influenced by OCD. I also just want to talk about OCD because I think that there are a lot of people out there that probably have it and don't know they have it. Um, Especially in my field, the IT field, I think there's a lot of people that deal with OCD, and in some ways it's beneficial, and in some ways it's a pain. And so I'm not here to help diagnose. I'm not here to tell you you have it. I am simply here to say, here I am. Here are my perspectives. This is what it's like. And if you think you may have OCD or you think that you want a diagnosis, you really should go to a mental health professional. There's nothing to be ashamed of for going to a mental health professional. And if there is one motto or one takeaway from my channel that I hope people do take away, is that having neurodiversity, or whatever you want to call it, is not a bad thing. And if you want some help for it, great. If you don't want help for it, great. But there's nothing wrong with having a brain that just functions a little bit differently. My particular type of OCD is what I would call OCD thinking. Part of that process is that I can get an idea and I obsess over it. I have more of obsessions than compulsions. Don't get me wrong. There are compulsions that I have seen. They're fairly mild compared to other cases, but in my particular case, I could have a bunch of pencils that are sharpened to varying degrees, and I'll organize them almost mindlessly. Uh, that was one of the first times that my primary care physician actually said, "Yeah, there's something up there." But I don't. It's not as aggressive in the areas like I have to wash my hands a bunch of times, or um, I have to check a door a bunch of times. But there are things like making these YouTube videos, which is this video. I'm trying to be a one take person in this. I really want to get to that phase because I love to do things like interviews and whatnot. But anytime I make a mistake, I pull back, even if it's I try to not do a lot of ums, and so I'm trying to put up with my ums for today. But um, when when I look at it and I'm really frustrated, or I have to take a moment to think, or I have to, whatever the case may be, I stop the video and I start from scratch. And that's, uh, you know, that's a process. I also, the first two videos, I did use a script. I didn't completely attach to it, but one of the things I didn't like is I felt a little more stiff. I don't know if it seems different with this one because I'm not doing a script at all this time. I really do want to get into that podcast mode where maybe I have some notes, but I'm not really hardcore reading a script. That's my end goal. I eventually actually want to even have somebody I work with. I find that some of my best conversations come as conversations with somebody with me. So sometime in the future, I actually would love to have a partner in this, and have these great two-way conversations. But for now, besides the TMS, besides talking a little bit about the OCD, I'll be talking about things like AI. I'll be talking about things like being employed. I'll be talking about things like IT in and of itself, and I'll talk about things from that perspective. If I did, for example, a review, the entire premise of the review would be to look at it from an OCD person's perspective. If I took you out to my car, we have a Subaru Outback. If I took you out there, I could point out areas where the trim is off a little bit. So, there are times where it's like, okay, um, I want to enjoy this car, but I can't enjoy this car because there's something funky going on. I'll give you a great example. We had a 2022 Subaru Outback, and there was a noise, a whining noise, kind of noise. And it was somewhat subtle, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was in place. I threw kind of red flags on it with the dealership. I said, it's a brand new car. I don't really want to have a car that's got this weird whining. And I couldn't figure out exactly where it was coming from. And I took it back over and over and over. And there were other issues. They had to redo a few things. But in the end, that noise just was not going away. And kind of had to kind of, I don't want to say be a Karen about it, but I was like, I need to talk to a manager. There's something wrong here. Everybody else kind of tried to shrug it off, but even my wife was kind of, and she has some hearing difficulties, and it's like she could hear it. So at the end of the day, I talked to the manager, and the manager came back and he rode with me, and he finally could hear it. He's like, oh, I do know what that is. So they sent or I can hear it. He didn't know what it was, but they lifted the vehicle, they ran the vehicle, and the technician finally said, okay, now I can hear it. I can hear it underneath the car. And it turned out to be a problem with the transmission. So they contacted Subaru. Subaru turned around and said, ooh, yeah, we know what that is. And they swapped it out. So, OCD can have positives, especially in a, is this possibly wrong perspective, but it can have negatives because there are cases where I overemphasize on something. Even the current vehicle, they ended up replacing, after a whole bunch of issues kept coming in and coming out, they eventually swapped me out with a 2023. So I went from a 2022 to 2023, and the 2023 vehicle had some issues. But these are issues that are not as like big mechanical failures. So I'm trying to level with them and try to say, okay, I get it. Maybe we can't build a car with where the trims are perfectly, oriented, but it's high and hard. Rattling plastics. Oh, there you go. There was another case in which, and understand a lot of the cases that I zero in on something with my OCD are not, they're not wrong. They're not illusions. They're not fake. It's just, I think some people would put up with them more than I do. There was a time where I picked up a iMac. I was trying the iMac during the Intel phase. It was nice because you could do boot camp and you could play games and whatnot. But anyway, before they went with an M1 processor. And so there was a buzz that I was getting from a particular series that I was dealing with. It was a whine. I went to Apple and we talked about it, and there was, we swapped it out like 3 times. They were like, we'll just swap it out, and swapped it out. Still the same thing. Came to find out that that series of chip that was being used in those iMacs had a whine problem that would occur in all of them, but only certain percent of the population could hear it. And lucky me, I could hear it. So, it's more of an issue of obsessing over something that you don't feel is in the correct space or in the correct or operating correctly that can really get you. In airplanes, that's I've taken off in a 737 and my brain goes, okay, this is what a 737 should sound like. And then if some oddity happens where the engine just sounds different, I can obsess over that. I can say, oh, wow, is there something wrong with the engine? Are we going up into the air and there's going to be a problem? Which is hard because I love flying. But if something is off, it's like, it's an obsession. It's a lockdown. It's your brain latches onto it. The best way I can really describe it is kind of like the thing that's looking out your eyes. I don't know if you want to call it a soul or an operator or whatever, that's independent of your brain, your thinking processes, your memories. That's what I look at as kind of going for a ride. And in OCD, this operator that's experiencing everything, the true core of you is dealing with a brain that's kind of going off on its own, that will grab an idea and start spinning on that idea. And no matter what you do to silence that, it just spins on and on and on until it breaks. Usually your brain wants an absolute answer. And that's where things kind of get hard, because I do have also Thanatophobia, which is the absolute fear of death. Yes, I have some religious background. I do have some interest in things like the supernatural and in ghosts or whatnot. Those are fascinating subjects. I don't know if I have a hard opinion on it, but despite all that, there is still a piece of my brain that goes, you could be wrong. There could be nothing. You could cease to exist forever. You'll never think again. You'll never feel again, ever, for eternity. And your OCD mind grabs that, and it's almost like it engages an emergency button. Oh my gosh, this is scary. I can't deal with this. And the OCD will then ruminate on that. It will just gnaw away looking for answers. And to kind of comply with where your brain's going, you could do things like research it. But that can get fun too, because you could start getting your brain feeling good. Oh, well, this is good, and this is good, and this is good. And then you come across something that breaks that. For example, I remember reading about the Jewish faith, and I was like, oh, look at these folks. They believe in a lot of things, and they're very dedicated. And lo and behold, then I find out that there is a segment of the Jewish population that doesn't even believe in an afterlife. But there you go. Brain grabs that, locks on, says, oh no, I don't have that comfort I was chasing for. Or I remember sitting down one time processing all this and going, all of a sudden out of the blue, a little thought came in and said, what if there is a God? And what if there is an afterlife and a heaven and all of that? But you got up there and God said, I just hate to break this to you, but all of this ends eventually too. And I'm like, why? And that's kind of why I give the analogy of kind of being this operator that is you, that's watching your brain functionally do its thing. You can't stop it. You don't really want it to do what it's doing, but it's going to do it anyway. It's just going to keep spinning and spinning and spinning until it's out of control. So, it's the difficulty is, in my mind, is that there's pros and cons. The pros is a lot of times you can solve or discover things or protect yourself, whether it be from, you're obsessing over it feels like a layoff is coming, or it feels like my boss doesn't like me very much, or whatever those cases may be. You do sometimes come up with conclusions that turn out to be true, but you can also have the opposite. You can catastrophize. You can say, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to be out on the streets. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my family. Everybody's going to fall apart. Everything's going to deteriorate. And because when in the absence of data, oftentimes in my OCD mind, it's the worst case scenario. I don't know if you can call that protection. I don't know if you can call that a mechanism that says, hey, I'm trying to protect myself from damage, so I'm going to prepare myself and defend myself from a worst case scenario. And it's not healthy. It's not good. And those are the parts I'd love to get rid of. But then, it's a two-way street on my writing. I want to be a writer, and I've had a story in my head for 20 years, but I obsess over the pieces of it. Well, would this character really do that? Would this character maybe not do that? And in the end, you don't get anything done. So, I'm going to adjust the mic like you see everybody do. But I think I see people even hold this particular mic. But at the end, then you don't get things accomplished. When you're put into a situation where you don't know, for example, I've been a manager before, but I've had moments where management is hard because you don't know where you're allowed to go. You get nervous about, am I really allowed to say stop, or am I really allowed to have a position or opinion on this? And it can freeze you up. That can happen in a job situation too. One of the problems my previous employer had, even though I tried to help them understand, I didn't have a lot of problems with customers I was interacting with, but there were certain things that they wanted done from an administrative standpoint that they'd say, well, I need you to do this, and my brain would okay, what are we doing here? And you can overthink those things, and then you can get panicked and then shut down and not get things accomplished. That was even a bigger thing with what do you call certifications. You know, in our industry, we have a lot of certifications, but those certifications can be hard to deal with because you overthink them. You know, there'll be 12 answers, and those 12 answers, you start over analyzing every single one of the answers, and you're like, well, this could be it, but maybe this is it. And you can get panicked to a point where it's really hard, even though you know the material, even though you can accomplish the goals, to be tested on it, your brain has a hard time consuming that. And when you're in a job that's going to punish you because you haven't achieved some of those certificates, it can build on that. It's like, okay, not only am I panicking because I'm overthinking all this, now I have the added little demon, could I lose my job over this? And then ironically, you shut down completely because it's hard to move forward when you're being kind of put in this, you know, get this done, get this done. We're not going to tell you what happens if you don't get it done, but you got to get it in. So, you know, another example of some of the problems with OCD really come down to conditions where somebody stops talking to you. And they don't tell you, hey, you know, I'm actually going to be out of town, or hey, that you're like, why did they stop talking to me? Are they mad at me? Is something again? It's that buildup of taking and filling in gaps that you might not necessarily want to. And like I've said, I think that there's a protection mechanism in the middle of that. OCD, the obsessions that I have, like I said, they're both been good and bad, positive and negative. And I think if you talk about it from an employment perspective, some of my best managers actually learned how to work with it. Matter of fact, use it in their favor. You know, I've heard somebody say, well, aren't you being used? I'm like, nah, well, aren't we all technically being used? We're all being used to get a job done. But when you're respectful, but you're like, I know how to get this guy to do or kind of watch or connect with my line of ideas and use the OCD in their favor, a lot of times a lot of great things can happen. And that's kind of unfortunate that not everybody is, and especially my past manager, two of them that I went through in my previous scenario, that really just didn't want to deal with it. One aspect I do think is important to understand is people with OCD, especially OCD thinking, can often be looked at as argumentative. And that's not what's really happening. And I wish more people understood this, is that argumentative, it comes off that way because the OCD mind is saying, why aren't they siding with me? What am I doing wrong that's not getting them to be convinced that my idea is what it is? Especially if it doesn't feel like the other person is at least saying, I understand where you're coming from. This is kind of why we don't agree with that stance. Because in IT, you know, I come in with my experience and I say, this might be the best way to go. And if they just say, no, we're not going that way, it is hard to just accept, oh, it's a no. But at the same time, even if I don't get the path that I want, if there's at least a feeling that I was listened to and validated, then I often will say, okay, fine, we'll go your way. You know, it could be a little selfish and say, well, okay, fine, this particular idea is gonna crash, and if it crashes, you'll come back. And there've been a lot of cases where, you know, the other side has been wrong, and you know, if I'm as respectful as I can be, that's the question that gets asked. Well, who are they going to come to, right? So I do have these ideas in my head that I've built over the years to say, okay, if I fight this idea and I come across as just stubborn and bullheaded and I act like a child because the idea isn't being processed the way I want it, if it does fail, they're not going to come back to me. They're going to go to somebody else. So if I come in and I present respectfully my ideas, and if those ideas get rejected, and then I turn around and go, okay, and do the best I can with the path that's been chosen, then I'm more likely to stay as a voice at the table. So a lot of OCD comes down to a combination of distractions and just altering your thinking paths to convince your OCD mind that there are better ways to go. Going back to the Thanatophobia, yes, I get it. It has no value whatsoever to sit there and think about the fact that you could cease to exist at the end of your life. But you don't. It's hard to explain how little control you feel of your processing mind, little hamster wheel spinning. So, it doesn't work when people say, just don't think about it. Sometimes it actually makes you think about it more. So that's kind of OCD for me. It's such a weird land of knowing where it works for me, where it doesn't work for me, areas I'd love to improve, areas that are difficult. And not only am I hoping with these videos that am I presenting some people a moment of, hey, I think that way too, also helping others understand why people like myself process things the way we do. And instead of trying to get rid of people, especially in an employment setting, instead of try to get rid of them because they're challenging, maybe more managers should look at that as an opportunity to learn how to interact with a different perspective. I mean, isn't that entire premise of diversity and employment is different perspectives? Well, OCD is a different perspective. And it's not just OCD. There's a lot of people that I've interacted with that have autism or ADHD or all these other different methods in which the brain processes information. And, a lot of them feel left out. They feel put into a place of stay over here. We don't want to deal with you. And what's sad is oftentimes I've interacted with people with some of these different perspectives that have brought up ideas that you wouldn't have gotten from one particular group of people. An autistic person is probably going to give you a different perspective than somebody that, may have ADHD. And I think the best thing to do in our system is to start talking about it, being more open about it, and kind of finding ways that we can all interact together. Instead of looking at me and saying, oh, JM, you're really trying to argue this point. Maybe say, okay, where are we going? What are you concerned about? What are your pieces that you feel that we haven't covered fully yet? And I could say, hey, but my concern is, what about this? And yes, I get there are times that my worst case scenarios can come across as defensive. It's like, I worry what happens here. It's like cloud. I'll give you a perfect example, cloud computing. A lot of people are like, well, we've been building data centers forever, and all of a sudden we're moving to cloud computing. And when that was happening, a lot of IT folks were not even being asked. It's like, we have these knowledges of your infrastructure and your design, but you're not even asking us whether the cloud component would be a good or bad thing. We're just told it's moving to the cloud. And even if we bring up some concerns, instead of working together, it's no, we're going to the cloud. All these data centers you built are all going to go away. And so then you get labeled as, well, you're argumentative. And it can be defensive. It can be, am I going to lose my job? Is everything I worked for are about to be thrown out the door? And I personally think there were so many better ways to handle it. I know that as a manager, when I was interacting with people that were really frightened of what the cloud was going to do to their career, we talked a lot about, well, how can we make it in your favor? Maybe understanding, for example, AWS or Azure, and starting to know these cloud technologies would just make it better for you in the future. there's so many, that's a perspective too. It's like, well, you really need to understand that we're moving to the cloud, and here are ways that you could make that scenario beneficial to you. And that kind of action can bring people to the table. I still think that it would have been much better for people to turn around and say, hey, this cloud thing, how much have you researched it? Can you give us a perspective? We want to work together to see if we can involve the cloud in our infrastructure. And since you've been managing that infrastructure forever, we'd love to have your input, instead of, hey, I'm the CIO, I just talked with my buddy on an airplane and we're going cloud. So, you know, it's different ways to look. It's different way to approach. It's different ways to make people function better. So, you know, that's kind of the stuff I want to talk about. That's kind of the stuff that this channel is going to be hitting on. And like I said, some of the stuff I want to do, whether it's talking about AI, which kind of has some similarities to the cloud problem, whether I want to talk about reviewing products, whatever I want to talk about technology. Because I know that some have said, well, JM, you've been dealing with technology for so long. Why not focus on technology? And I have to look at it and say, well, let's be honest and open. There's a lot of technology channels out there. How do I differentiate? And now that I'm thinking about it, my differentiation would be, how do we talk about this from an OCD perspective? So that's my thought processes. That's what I'm thinking about. That's this is, maybe I'll cut a couple things out, but overall, this is a single take. This is listening in my brain, just kind of push out ideas, and I hope this has been interesting. I'll be doing more of these, and you know, I'd love feedback on what style you prefer. Do you prefer when I'm reading off a script? Do you prefer when I'm just kind of openly talking? And what is the thought behind me maybe pulling in somebody else to have a one-on-one discussion, or even just maybe having guests to talk about different subjects and having more of a two-way dialogue. You know, traditional stuff, you know, I'd love if you subscribed and liked it. I do think I'm hoping to help folks, like I said, not only understand OCD, but for those that are dealing with OCD, to understand how we can, how we can get along better, how we can function better, and how we can utilize some of these as skills. So again, like and comment if you like this stuff. I will be doing my update on TMS Week 3 tomorrow. So I hope everybody has a fantastic day. I hope everybody thinks positive, and well, that's my opinions. Have a great day.